real props for I am so grateful to be with you here today. I need to apologize. I've never been a big fan of podiums. I wander a lot, like my mind wanders a lot. So I'm talking about something that matters deeply to me. I was a little bit, I got thrown a curveball when I was asked to speak here today because I saw that Ryan Anderson was speaking this morning. And most of my talk, typically I just plagiarize from Ryan. When I saw that he was speaking here, I said, I gotta come up with some new stuff. And actually, it's funny, I promise you we did not, Ryan and I did not coordinate this before today, but you'll probably see a few slides, and you will see a few slides in my presentation that he referenced, and I'm gonna talk about what's happening in Ohio with those slides. That was all too funny. So I'm here to talk to you about courage in the culture, and engaging the culture around us without losing our witness as Christians. As was mentioned, Citizens for Community Values, the organization I lead, we are a Christian public policy organization in the state. We want to see public policy enacted in Ohio that reflects the truth of God's word. If what we're saying, if we believe that God's word is the truth, not a truth, but it is the eternal truth, that should impact how we view all of our lives, not just how we interact with our neighbors, not just how we lead our family, not just how we run our business, but how we vote, how we advocate for policy, how we lead in our state and nation, in our communities, and that's the premise that my organization works from. Now, as you can imagine, when that is the nature of your work, when that's the nature of your worldview, you're not always the most popular in places like Columbus or Washington, D.C. You might not be the most popular when you are the Christian in your community, in your school, in your friend group. And as we're seeing in American culture today, the reality is hostility towards people of faith is growing every day, towards Christians is growing every single day. And so what we're going to do here today is I'm really going to try to depress you. I'm going to start off, and I'm just going to bring you low. By the end of the day, hopefully not too many of you will walk out, because I'm going to take you on this little journey with me where we're going to get real low. But if you can hang with me, if you don't give up on me too soon, we're going to try to get you back up again before we get out of here. And what I will say is I'm going to try to leave a good amount of time for questions at the end. Especially for anybody, for the young people in the room. That's one of the things I love about this conference. There's so many, you have such good age diversity. You have young people who've been in this work for a while. It's great. I want to encourage you, if there is a nagging question on issues of life, on family, on transgenderism, on sexuality, if there's a nagging question you have, or you've been in a difficult conversation with somebody and you just don't know how to answer that question, feel free to ask him. And that's actually the nice part about the cards, is it's all anonymous. I might try to ask everybody to match up handwritings later so I can say, who asked that dumb question? I seriously, I want to encourage you, if you have a question, I want to talk these things through with you, because that's what the purpose of this is. So as we think about this idea of courage in the culture, the idea that really comes around to me quite a bit is this idea of prudence. I define prudence as understanding the times and knowing how to respond. And I love this story. Who knows what this picture is right here? We got a few lawmakers in here that can answer, because this is let's see, the young guy right here in the red shirt. What's that? George Washington, I don't think, was quite alive at this point, at this time when this picture was taken. Who else? Sir, right there in the vest. That's Commodore Perry. That's Lake Erie. So this is much closer than when Washington was crossing. And actually, this is a picture from the State House. When you go into the State House Rotunda, you'll look up, and this picture is probably about almost the size of this whole wall right here. It's beautiful. If you've never been down to the Ohio State House, come down, find Candace Keller. But I love this story because it's a great American story. It's from the Battle of 1812. But really, it captures what prudence is all about. So you had Commodore Perry, you had the British coming in, and they had obviously the Brits were known for their superior naval force. And they had these massive ships with these massive long guns that could shoot for literally for a mile and be relatively accurate. And you had Commodore Perry, who their sea command, our naval force was much smaller, had smaller boats, didn't nearly have the same ammunition power as the Brits did. And what you see in this, what the story ultimately ends up is that the Americans won because Commodore Perry understood what he was dealing with. He understood his enemy. He understood the challenges he was facing. You can see, as you mentioned, his initial boat actually went down and he changed boats. But what ultimately his strategy was as the Brits were firing on them, they took their smaller boats and went right at them, right through them, and came up behind them. And when the Brits tried to turn around, their boats started hitting each other. They weren't able to maneuver quite as fast. And because of that, they were able to seize the day. Commodore Perry could not have done this if he didn't understand the times he was in. If he just went head on and meet them on their terms, he would not have been able to win that battle. And again, I'm always a little bit hesitant, especially in modern times, to use war analogies, because I don't want to, I want us to always recognize who our true war is against, that we don't wage war against flesh and blood, but against the evil princes and principalities. As one person said last night, we really have one enemy, and it is the enemy, and that enemy is big enough for us. So I always am a little bit hesitant to use war analogies, but this picture is so perfect of what we're facing, is that as we are trying to understand the times that we're in, if we're trying to respond to the times we're in, we need to understand who we are, where we are, and how to get there. So I'm going to start us off by going pretty low, and so we can understand. This is a picture. I promise you, this was in my presentation before Ryan said anything, okay? Ryan doesn't own this picture, okay? Actually, the public schools do, sadly enough. This photo, as some of you who were in for Ryan's presentation at breakfast this morning, this photo is of the gender unicorn. As Ryan said, he started with the genderbread person, and that wasn't PC enough for the LGBT community and the leftists. Instead, they went to the gender unicorn, which is very clearly targeted at children and pushing the transgender ideology. For those of you who weren't there this morning with Ryan, this picture is a resource that GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, along with groups like Planned Parenthood that go into public schools, teach in Ohio public schools today to help kids understand the issues of gender expression and gender identity, to understand the issues of transgenderism. And they'll see, they kind of explain to children, this is what your gender identity is. So do you identify as a express that? And as Ryan said, so many of these things are really just based in gender stereotypes. What's your sex assigned at birth? Not what your actual sex is, but what your sex was. Who are you physically attracted to? Who are you emotionally attracted to? These are all the things that they teach in public schools today. And what we have found, so we know, one, education is being taught in public schools, but it actually goes a little bit further. And actually when I first read Ryan's book, When Harry Became Sally, one thing jumped out in particular to me was that Ryan said that the National Education Association and the ACLU have been giving instructions to public schools that said, listen, if a child shows up to a teacher and says, hey, I think I'm transgender, I think I'm gender dysphoric, the teacher should not tell the parents because they're afraid, just in case the child doesn't come from an affirming household. And so they use the example of if Billy shows up at school one day mom drops Billy off at school and he's wearing his t-shirt and his jeans, he comes into the school and mom pulls away, Billy should go straight to the principal's office, and he can go to the principal's office, put on his dress and makeup and hair, do his hair, and spend the day as Susie. And then at the end of the day, he goes back to the principal's office, he takes off the makeup, takes off the dress, puts on his t-shirt and jeans, goes back out to mom, and the mom is never the wiser. These are actually the instructions, the recommendations that the National Education Association, Planned Parenthood, ACLU, Listen, that they're giving to schools. And I read that, I said, that's crazy, that's not happening here. Well, we found out actually it is happening here. We found out, we know of one story in particular from Central Ohio of a teacher who was leading a high school class, and a young lady said she wanted to be referred to as a male name. And the teacher said, this girl, she's going through this. We should talk about this. I'm going to reach out to the parents to give them a heads up and let them know what's going on. The next day, he gets an email from the school's legal counsel with the superintendent CC'd on there saying, you cannot tell the parents. And if you tell the parents, you will be fired. And this is happening in Ohio. This is not Massachusetts. This is not New York. This is the Buckeye State. This is a letter that I just got my hands on last week. You might remember Ryan talking about the conversion therapy bans. So the laws they're passing in different municipalities, Cleveland's passed one, Columbus has passed one, Toledo, Dayton, Cincinnati, a number of cities have passed these, a number of states have passed these. Individuals who are same-sex attracted and are trying and do not want to pursue their same-sex attraction, or they are gender dysphoric, so that means they feel like they might be in the wrong body, they are genuinely struggling with gender dysphoria, but they don't want to pursue sort of biological surgeries and those types of things. They want help aligning their mental state with their biological reality. These laws ban licensed therapists and counselors from providing that therapy. Well, you know, I've always kind of looked around Ohio. I said we've got a pretty solid General Assembly. We've got a pretty solid governor, especially today. There's no way they're ever going to be able to pass one of these things here. Well, they always find a way to get around, and this was a letter that was sent out in November from the Ohio Council that basically tells therapists that if it's the counseling and therapy that somebody is asking for, that could be abusing your patients and could be reason for you to lose your license. Now, do I think that they would win if they tried to do that, and then we sued them? Probably not. But just sending out this letter has a chilling effect on therapists and counselors. I should just say, if you're a licensed therapist and counselor, I'd love to talk to you. Because this is a terrifying thing that they put out. And this board is 12 individuals who none of you would know their names. They're never going to show up on any of your ballots. They're not elected. They just decided this on their own. The story that Ryan mentioned earlier today. This is something where a 16-year-old girl who was gender dysphoric, was wanting to be a boy, was just struggling with this. And I want to pause here and just say one thing in particular. Gender dysphoria is a very real condition. It's a painful experience of feeling like you are not in the right body. That something's wrong with your physical being, and your mental state doesn't align with your biological realities. Ryan talked about this. The best analogy of this is anorexia. You know, you feel like something's wrong with your body, and it doesn't. The reality of whatever's going on with your body doesn't line up with your mental state. And just like with an anorexic, as Ryan said, you wouldn't recommend liposuction. With somebody who's high-dose hormone, social transition, that doesn't help the sort of misalignment of what's going on psychologically with that individual. And this was a case where you had a 16-year-old girl who was genuinely going through hardship and pain, feeling like there was something wrong with her body. So the parents took her over to Cincinnati Children's Hospital, to their gender clinic, not knowing what was going to happen. This clinic held the child there for 4 weeks and recommended that she be put on high-dose testosterone. And the parents said no, and the hospital would not release the child to the parents in their custody. Filed neglect and abuse charges against the parents for not allowing their child to be put on high-dose hormones. I should say, having worked in the Attorney General's office, I've worked in a lot of custody cases. When I first heard about this case, I was like, there's got to be something else going on here. Custody cases are always more messy than people say they are. There's no way this can be true. Well, you look at the files. Job and Family Services did a home inspection and found that the home was a safe environment. They interviewed both parents. They did all the interviews that you typically do in a custody situation. Everything came back fine, except the only thing the parents would not consent to was putting their 16-year-old daughter on high-dose testosterone for the purpose of gender transition. And that was enough to file neglected abuse charges. This case went to court before Judge Sylvia Hendon in Hamilton County, and ultimately the court ruled that the parents lost custody and put the 16-year-old in custody she was actually 17 by the time the decision came out, in the custody of the maternal grandparents. There's so much with this case to unpack that is so wrong. But again, this happened here in Ohio. I know this family. We know this story intimately. We're actually working on a piece of legislation right now to make sure this story will be the single most controversial thing that we propose this year at the State House. So you have what's going on with the gender dysphoria. When I talk about understanding the times, I think we need to understand what's going on in the media and what's going on in the culture at large with their view of Christians. How many of you are involved in Catholic education or private Christian education at all? This story is particularly relevant to you. This was a headline out of the Washington Post about Karen Pence working at a bigoted, anti-gay, anti-trans school. Basically, she worked at a school that had a statement of faith that's similar to any of the Catholic schools or Christian schools. You're involved in the same statement of faith that any church would have. The Washington Post, CNN, New York Times all ran stories that these institutions were anti-gay and anti-trans because they had a requirement statement of faith that called for a biblical sexual ethic. There was this story just last week out of the Washington Post. This is an op-ed from Cynthia Nixon, who was condemning Vice President Joe Biden for saying that Mike Pence was a decent man. Just, literally, that deserved condemnation because the former vice president said the current vice president is a decent man. She wrote, can I get the slide out of whack here? She wrote, when a chorus of progressives and LGBTQ activists, including myself, pointed out that a man who has built his career on homophobia and misogyny cannot possibly be considered decent, some dismissed it as just Twitter outrage. While Biden later walked back his comments and acknowledged that, quote, there is nothing decent about being anti-LGBTQ rights, I think it's important to explain why calling Pence a decent guy is an affront to the real meaning of the word. This is Mike Pence, guys. I don't think Mike Pence has ever offended anybody. I mean, the guy's white toast. I love the guy, but come on, it's Mike Pence. Look at that face. Literally, the only thing offensive about Mike Pence is that he's a Christian. And what's crazy to me is not just that Cynthia Nixon, some Hollywood actress, wrote these words, but that the Washington Post thought this was worthy of an editorial. Could you imagine them running an op-ed of someone saying Joe Biden's not a decent guy because he thinks it's okay to kill babies, because he thinks infanticide is okay? This is another area of understanding the times we live in, the infanticide conversation about whether it's okay to basically allow for a child to die after a botched abortion. And I won't dwell on this long, guys. These stories are very real. When I was in the Arizona Attorney General's office, it's hard for me to talk about. I got my wife and our two daughters here. We just had a girl about 2.5 months ago. When I was in the Arizona Attorney General's office, we were prosecuting a case of a woman who had defrauded the state by we're allowed to do that. And as we were looking at the story, as we were going to prosecute the case, I was kind of looking through, I was the pro-life guy in the office, so I was kind of looking through the case files, and I realized in the doctor's medical records, it said they delivered an alive 24-week child, and when the child was delivered, they had an APGAR score of 4. An APGAR score is a test they use to test the viability of a child once they're born. Typically you want to see a child have an APGAR score of 7 when they first come out, but an APGAR score of 4 or above is generally considered viable. I mean, even by the left standards. And so they delivered this child, they tested it, they checked their vitals. They ran the APGAR score, so they checked the child's vitals and said they have an APGAR score of 4. And then they just left them there. And then the child died. This is happening. This isn't a political ploy, the bill that they're running in Congress right now. This is genuinely something that we see happening in America today, where they can look. I was there for the birth of both of my children, and they can look at a child just like the children we had and say, okay, we're just going to set you here and walk away. There's the case of Jack Phillips. Many of you probably are familiar with Jack. Jack is the cake baker out of Colorado that won his Supreme Court case because he didn't want to be forced to participate in a same-sex wedding. Let me make something very clear. Jack sold countless cakes and had countless gay and transgender customers. He was not denying service to anyone because they were gay or transgender. Jack was a Christian. He didn't make Halloween cakes. He didn't make obscene sort of bachelor or bachelorette party cakes. And somebody came in and wanted them to make a cake with rainbow flags on it celebrating a gay wedding. And he said, I'm not going to make you a custom cake with that. If you want to buy something off the rack, go for it, but I'm not going to communicate that message. So Jack won that case in the U.S. Supreme Court. What a lot of folks don't realize is before that case was even settled, a transgender individual came in and tried to buy a cake from Jack that was blue on the inside and pink on the outside because he wanted to say, I'm a man on the inside, but outside I'm really a woman. And Jack said no, and they filed another suit against Jack. And actually just this week, he won again. Yeah. But they keep coming. The persistence. Guys, I brought this story up because it's the persistence of it. And then, how did Jack's story happen? How was Jack even allowed to end up in court like that? And we have one of these bills introduced in Ohio right now from a senator that we might be in her district right now, actually. Senator Nikki Antonio introduced Senate Bill 11. This bill basically requires all businesses to participate in same-sex weddings. It requires all bathrooms to allow men and women's restrooms. It requires all domestic violence shelters, women's domestic violence shelters, to allow men to stay in there if they identify as a woman. There's actually a case right now out of Juneau, Alaska that has a sexual orientation gender identity law that at night it's a women's shelter, and there's beds, there's cots lined up that are literally this far apart from each other, and a transgender man, a man shows up who identifies as a woman, showed up and said, I want to stay here, I want to sleep in these facilities, and they said, no, this is for women, and he is now suing them because they would not allow him. And I've worked in a homeless shelter. I can tell you the vast majority of women that showed up there at one point or another have been sexually abused. And just the presence of a man is traumatizing to them in these vulnerable stages. And I can also tell you a lot of the men that stayed at our facility had sexual deviancy in their past. And we loved them and ministered on them and tried to help them, but we sure as heck kept them apart from the women. This bill would require that they be allowed to stay with women. This bill would require that boys be allowed to stay and play in girls' sports and on overnight trips, in school trips, that boys be allowed to stay in girls' hotels. This bill has been introduced, but it's backed by the single most powerful interests in the state of Ohio. This group, Ohio Business Competes, popped up out of nowhere last year in Ohio, and we realized this was being funded by Tim Gill and George Soros. And it has 350 different businesses that are backing it and pushing this in the state of Ohio. And the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, maybe the single most powerful lobbying interest in the state of Ohio, also came out and endorsed this. That one kind of blew me away, because the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, they put out their legislative agenda, and they had 4 deregulation bills, and then SOGI, which is quite possibly the largest regulation you can have here. And you guys remember the old Sesame Street sayings, one of these things is not like the other? That doesn't really fit in here. How are we doing on time, by the way? Am I? All right, exactly. 10 minutes? Oh, I gotta bring you guys back up. I've taken you so low, we gotta get back up, and we gotta get up quick. And I realize we're running out of time, so if you've got questions afterwards, you can talk. So we've come low here, but I wanna bring you back up, and the best way I can do it is starting in God's word. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulations, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Guys, God has, through his Holy Spirit, has given us dominion over this earth. And the way we respond to these things is not by shrinking back. And that's one of the things I really want to impress upon you today, is that we see these things and they get really scary, to be honest, because we don't want to be known as the bigot. We don't want to be known as the hate monger. We don't want to be mischaracter or get into uncomfortable conversations with family members or friends, people we love dearly. And so what we end up doing is we end up kind of retreating and creating our own sort of Christian subcultures. We end up not going into places that we shouldn't be. You know, I kind of use, we kind of end up doing this. You guys know this saying? It's funny to me, some of the young people in here might not know what this is, because this was like 93. I'm seeing some people in here, you guys weren't around in 93. You know, this is, yeah, you're good. You know, everything the light touches is yours, and what about that dark area over there? Oh, we don't go over there. That's kind of how Christians act today. Oh, that dark area over there, we don't go into media, guys. We don't engage with the media. We don't go into the cities, guys. We don't get involved in that. We don't go into the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce is leftist. We're not going to resist that. What does that do? That creates a vacuum that's going to get filled up by something. And what the left has done more so than Christians today is they've looked at everything and they said, that's ours. The Chamber of Commerce would have never, last time the SOGI bill was really pushed about 10 years ago, the Chamber of Commerce fought it vehemently. They said, this is crazy, guys. This is massive regulations. We can't support this. And now they're supporting it. How'd that happen? It's because the LGBT community said, no, you're ours too. We're going to make it ours. We're the ones with the Holy Spirit. We're the ones, we're kings and queens of the universe with a spirit of courage inside of us. But for some reason we back off. So what are 3 things that we need in order to have this spirit of courage? First off is community. And this is Hebrews 10:24, let us consider how to stir up one another in love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So as I'm telling you to go out, the first thing I'm going to tell you is before you go out, make sure you have a group of people around you that are close to you. We have a loneliness epidemic in America today. This is from Cigna's Loneliness Index. 43% of Americans sometimes or always feel like their relationships are not meaningful and that they are isolated. 47% don't feel like they have meaningful in-person social interactions. Generation Z is the loneliest generation and claims to be in worse health than older generations. We are isolating ourselves, guys. This is why God gave us the church, so that we can come around each other and build each other up. Guys, I'm the political guy, I'm the politics guy, and I'm telling you, the most important thing you want to do to have your political witness is get in a church and start there and build meaningful relationships. Have people around you. This is hard. This life is hard. This culture is hard. Build meaningful relationships. Have people around you that are holding you accountable and encouraging you out. Otherwise, this all gets way too hard. This book I highly recommend. Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert. Rosaria Champagne Butterfield. She was a gender studies professor at University of Syracuse, a lesbian leader in her community, really deeply involved in the LGBT community. She started writing a research paper on a Presbyterian pattern of the Lord and left her partner. She's now she tells her story in this book. And one of the most convicting things, it's a pretty short book. I really want to encourage you to read this. One of the most convicting things about this book, when you read it, is that she said the hardest thing for her about leaving the lesbian lifestyle was not missing sex with women. It was the fact that the LGBT community was a community. Every night somebody's house was open for people to get together. Every night there was great friendship and great fellowship. And she gets into the church and everybody was like, all right, see you Sunday, bye. That's not how we were called to live. The LGBT community is living more in community better than we are at times. This is such a call to us when I read that book. The second thing, though, once you get built up, once you have people around you, once you have people encouraging you, is connect. We're told to pray for our leaders. Guys, and I'm here to talk to you connecting specifically with your state lawmakers. Representative Candace Keller is here with us today, and she can affirm this with you guys. State lawmakers, not a lot of people pay attention to what's going on at the State House. So when a lawmaker hears from you, that rattles their bones in a meaningful way. My wife used to work in a congressional office, and I remember her telling me about, she was in this one Congressman Schweikert's office during, I think it was the Obamacare fight, and they'd get the calls of people calling in saying what they want to do on Obamacare. And you know what her job was? She had a sheet with a tally, and she got a call, someone go off for about 5 minutes, and so wait, do you support or oppose it? I oppose it. Okay. Put a notch down on the paper. That's Congress. The State House? You contact your lawmaker, it matters. It makes a big difference. And I can tell you what happens at the General Assembly impacts your day-to-day life a whole lot more than what happens in Washington, D.C. All of these stories I'm telling you about today, all of them we can fix at the General Assembly. Guys, don't get me wrong. I care about Congress. I care about Washington, D.C. I care about the Supreme Court. But in terms of making the lives of Ohioans better, the lives of the people in your community, the lives you have been called to love on, your neighbors, you want to impact them, it's your local city council, it's our General Assembly. We have a tool for you at CCV. This is our action center. We'll send out action alerts from time to time and say, hey, this is what's going on. The heartbeat bill's coming up, the Parents' Rights Act is coming up, contact your lawmakers, where you just enter your information, and you can send an email. You enter your name and address, and it'll tell you who your state lawmakers are and how to contact them. I'm going to move on a little quickly here. I use this picture here, guys, to just emphasize this point a little bit more. The deep red on there are the conservative counties that President Trump won in 2016. The deep blue are the counties that Hillary Clinton won. Guys, we are segregating ourselves by beliefs today. And the only way this is gonna change is if Christians say, no, you know what, Cuyahoga, Franklin, and Hamilton County, you are ours too. We're going in. And third is have faith. Have faith that it can happen. Guys, I'm wearing a little bracelet. You can go stop by our booth a little later with the Ohio State motto that says, with God, all things are possible. So often today, we look around and we're like the disciples on the boat. We look at these situations and we see how bad things are. Cry out. But we do it from a place of anxiety. We do it from a place of fear. And what did Christ say? Oh, you have little faith. Guys, do you actually believe, you're here today, and I'm sure you actually believe all these stories I'm telling you of how terrible they are. But I want to ask you, do you actually believe we can fix them? Yes. Do you act like we can fix them? Or is it just easier to just watch Fox News and feel really good about how bad things are? I'll tell you what, there were a lot of things in 2016 that were disheartening, and by the grace of God, things ended up pretty well for us, especially considering what they could have been. We certainly saw God's mercy. However, the thing I was most disappointed about And don't get me wrong, I was disappointed about, a lot of the behavior stuff from Trump and all that kind of stuff, but again, we can get into that. I don't want to get into those conversations. The thing that was most disappointing to me was the position that I saw Christians talking about, which was they were saying, if Hillary Clinton wins, we are doomed. America is over if Hillary Clinton wins. Now, if Hillary Clinton won, the Supreme Court would not be in a position today to overturn Roe v. Wade. If Hillary Clinton won, everything that Ryan talked about would have been put on steroids and just rammed down the entire nation's throat. There is no denying that. I will argue to my death that America is in such a better position today because Hillary Clinton did not win. However, if Hillary Clinton would have won, Christ would have not come off the throne and crawled back into the grave. And sadly, there was a spirit of fear in the church that if she wins, America's doomed. And maybe America would have been doomed, but the church would have not been doomed. Guys, the question is, do we have the faith to look at the evil around us and really believe that light overcomes darkness? Do we really believe that greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world? If we do, then let's get out of here and start doing something about it. Guys, I'm grateful for you today. I don't know if we have time for questions, but it's been a real pleasure talking with you. We got a little bit of time for questions? Awesome. Oh, great. Oh, sure. Well, while we get these questions, the one thing I was going to do is we wanted to give away a copy of Ryan's book. And to do that, how we're going to say when I said we want you to connect with your state lawmakers, we got a little contest. We got Claire in the back. Claire is the one working our table. Claire is also close personal friends with Mike DeWine. She was just on the cover of the Columbus Dispatch. It was after his State of the State. He was going through shaking people's hands, and they took a picture of him. And I looked at the picture. I got the paper in the morning. I looked at it, and I said, "He's shaking Claire's hand. She said she was going to lunch. What is she doing there?" But I want to see who here knows who they're, and I'm going to pick one. So if you know, raise your hand. We'll pick somebody at random, and if it's true, if you do know who it is, we're going to test it. We're going to get you a copy of Ryan's book, When Harry Became South. So who knows who their state representative and state senator is? You don't count. State representative, state senator. If you know, put your hand up. We'll go, sir, right here. Who's your state representative, state senator? Okay, we're gonna try somebody else. Who we got? We'll go here. I know you. So I have to apologize. Our system that we use to check doesn't use Tennessee. We only know Ohio, so I can't go there. So who Ohio is? We'll go right here, sir. Who's that? And Romer? I want to broadcast his address to all of you. Claire's going to use our action center, enter his address in, and it's going to pull up who his state rep and state senator are. And if it's true, then we're going to get him a copy of the book. So we got questions?
Excuse me. How do we get our pastors to speak out publicly?
Amen. Amen. That is a huge question. And I should say, one, we want to help you do that. Ruth McNeil, are you here? So Ruth McNeil is CCB's is our church relations director. She leads what we call our church ambassador network. And what we want to do is we want to help churches and pastors understand the time to know how to respond and begin to speak out on this. What I will say is no pastor that I know wakes up in the morning and thinks they are delinquent of duties and thinks they're not doing the job they've been called to. And so often, if the approach is, hey, pastor, grow a spine and get in there, they're going to lock up. What we want to see is, hey, pastor, and actually I think last night was a great example of it. I went to a fundraiser in Toledo that a pregnancy center had at a church that typically doesn't get involved in political space. And I think it was a good example. Let's help pastors see the real life impact that policy issues have on their missions. And honestly, the stories that we tell here today, like, hey guys, they're coming to shut down ministries. I've got stories of Christian adoption agencies, of homeless shelters, food banks, those types of places being shut down because they're just trying to operate according to their religious beliefs. What I've seen be the most effective way of getting pastors to engage is help them understand this isn't about Republicans or Democrats. This is about this isn't about the donkey or the elephant. It's about the Lamb of God. So how do we tell that story to them in that way? And that's what we want to do. And I'm happy that if you have a pastor that you think, hey, they're not understanding why it's so important that we speak to these issues, we want to help you have that conversation in a constructive way.
What percent of the population is gender confused? And what would be the answer to that prior to the transgender movement? And what would be the percentage after the transgender movement?
So the stats on this are a little bit iffy, but if you're talking about individuals with gender dysphoria, generally speaking, especially, and Ryan writes a lot about this in his book, before the Obergefell decision, the same-sex marriage decision in 2015, transgenderism wasn't a topic that was really broadly discussed, really. I mean, there were things going on with it, obviously, but it wasn't where it is today. So generally speaking, you were looking at under 1% of the population was gender dysphoric, dealing with gender dysphoria. Now, again, mind you, we live in a country of 330 million people. We're still talking millions of people. It wasn't that large. What we're seeing now, and the numbers are all over the map on this, but because of things like the gender unicorn being taught in schools and children being told, hey, and again, the thing that gets me about this is that this is the failure of the feminist movement, ultimately, that hey, little boy, because you like pink stuff or because you might not want to play football with the other boys, you must be a girl. Because that message is becoming so prominent in schools, we are seeing an increase of children saying they are gender dysphoric. And as Brian said, if these children start heading down that treatment path that places are recommending, they kind of get locked into it for a long term. It's awful.
What benefits does the left get from confusing children about their gender?
So this to me, guys, is, I think there's a broader question here, where we have to recognize the spiritual nature of the conflict that we're in. And it's why I'm so big on, we've got to be in a church, we've got to be in prayer, we got to get those foundations right first and foremost. If I'm understanding the questioning right, is like, to what ends are they? What I would say is, just like, I think a lot of folks thought, well, once they get gay marriage, it's all, that's the end of the war, that's the end of the culture wars, we're moving on. Transgenderism isn't the end game, guys. The end game is the destruction of the church, is the destruction of the message of Jesus Christ. That's and I would tell you most, and I try to practice what I preach. I interact with LGBT individuals and liberals and leftists all the time. They wouldn't say that. They wouldn't even tell you. They wouldn't even think that genuinely. They wouldn't say that. My goal is to destroy the church. That's not that individual's goal. But the movement at large, you see where a lot of their angst is at, because Christians, and what I would say Orthodox Christians, those of us that hold to the inerrancy of the Bible, we're not the only ones that believe these things about sex and gender. Jews do, Muslims do, those, a lot of other major religions do, but you don't see the attacks on them like you see on Christianity. I think there's something telling there.
The question is, why do parents send their children to these schools? And maybe the question is really directed about schools that teach the gender unicorn.
Yep. So that's an awesome question. And you know what I want to tell you? Go ask one of them. Go meet them and sit down and get to know them. And I'll tell you, most of them would say, well, I went to the public school. Public schools are fine. It's not an ideological, like, let's go change American culture to be communist and socialist and pro-LGBT and all this stuff. there's not this underlying agenda. It's just, no, I went to the public school. I went to Warren G. Harding. What you do. And unless there's somebody in their life telling them, hey, there's another option here, or there's something crazy going on here, they don't know. Life is hard, guys, you know this. Managing kids and bills and medical concerns and work and all, it's hard. So it's really easy just to say, I'm just gonna send my kid to the school down the street. And I don't think they're purposely being delinquent parents. But I honestly, guys, go have that kind of, this is exactly my part. Go talk to them. If you don't know somebody who has a kid in public schools, I want to encourage you to go find somebody and build that relationship and say, hey, you know what? Everything in me says I don't want to go over there because it seems like there's darkness over there, but the Holy Spirit says, you're mine, you're his. I'm going to go for you. And that long term is going to have a much bigger impact on anything else. I will say too, this is also why we formed the Ohio Christian Education Network at CCV. There's a lot more on this, but it's creating alternatives for parents. So once parents realize, hey, there's some bad things going on in public schools, what do I do with my kid now? Well, we've got robust private schools. We have a robust voucher system that a lot of families can access and be able to send their kids to a private school. They can homeschool, and we're advocating for more educational options for families, because I'll just say, big picture, with a lot of these issues we see with public schools, the only way our opinion is the only way we're really going to change these things, especially in the short term, is if we get real competition in the education space and parents can say, hey, I don't like what you're teaching here, and the school will likely say, we don't care, and the parent will say, okay, peace out, I'm gone, and they'll go to a different school. And until that starts happening, we're not going to have the momentum to really change the public schools the way we need them to be. We're not anti-public schools. We think this is, oh hey, what are you doing here, honey? This is Naomi. This might be a sign that we're done. She's saying, Dad, you talk too much. Let's get out of here. So is there any other questions, or are we good?
Because I gave you the wrong time, we had more than 10 minutes left when I told you 10. I have time for a question for me.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And but this will, I think, affect other people too. They might be very interested, because there are probably quite a few people here who have some involvement in non-public education, private, Catholic, Christian, whatever the case may be. So I am interim principal of an urban Catholic grade school, at which 100% of our students receive vouchers. So our school could not exist without vouchers. So my question is, what is the likelihood that the government, whether it's the state or the federal government, or maybe there's some other level of government, county government, will withhold money from schools that do not cooperate with the transgender movement and all the other political correctness about sexuality? You know, what is the likelihood that we won't get vouchers anymore because we teach Christian or Catholic sexual doctrine and we stick to it? Are we in danger of closing?
So this is a brilliant question. This is actually one of the reasons we formed the Ohio Christian Education Network that has both Protestant and Catholic schools in it. And I should say, I'm trying not to get distracted right now because I can tell that somebody has a poopy diaper. But it's okay. You get used to it. Sometimes I joke, the state motto of Ohio is, with God, all things are possible. We have a motto over our door, which is, there's poop on it. This is actually one of the reasons we formed the Ohio Christian Education Network, is that we want to make sure that the voucher program never gets strings put on them that would basically turn private schools into de facto public schools. That's not the case right now, but we need the lobbying muscle, and we need the muscle in the communities to make sure that doesn't happen. So conceivably, it could happen. But in the meantime, though, we should, this is one of those places where I know some people are afraid of voucher programs because they're like, well, they're going to take over the private schools and then our private schools are going to shut down. Well, without vouchers, most private schools couldn't operate. And why should we just concede government money for education to public schools that are failing our kids and not say, no, we need to make sure there's other options for kids if these schools are failing. So it is a threat. That's why we're here. That's why we need you to get involved, is to make sure that never happens. And I'll tell you, I don't think it's gonna happen anytime soon. I don't see that happening in the next 10 years, where the voucher programs basically say if you have a statement of faith, you can access them. And actually, we're pushing to do two things. One, expand the voucher program so more children can access these vouchers. And two, decrease regulation on them so that schools are more free to operate according to their beliefs. This is essential, and until we get to that place where every child has the option to take their taxpayer dollars and follow their school around, it's not gonna work. I'll leave you with one last stat on this. The average is $6,000. Now again, there's limited students who are eligible for them. You might be, you might not be. The baseline amount of money that the state spends on a child in public schools is $8,500. Columbus Public, that has all failing school districts, they get $20,000 per kid, and they're failing.
Oh.
So this is why, mind you, right down the street from them is Harambe Christian Schools, which is a Christian school that runs on vouchers, and they have 80% of children from single households. The vast majority of them are from impoverished households, and they get better test scores in Harambe Christian schools than they get in Worthington Public Schools, which is one of the upper, one of the white suburban public schools. School choice works, school choice matters. To me, it's one of the things we see as long-term that's gonna be transformational in the state of Ohio. And thank you for being a principal. We need people in
Two things. First, not only for his talk and answering questions, but also for his work, let's once again applaud Aaron Baer. Second thing, some housekeeping. Please remember to check the folder you were given. There are things in there. Also, please remember to keep looking at the booklet. There's an awful lot in that booklet, in that program. For example, if you want an autograph from one of our speakers who has also written the book, that's designated with a B. If you find in the program the book signing opportunities, okay? Also realize that photos of today and tomorrow will be posted on the Bringing America Back to Life website on Monday. So on Monday you can check for photos. And audio presentations will be available for download on our website next week. So if you visit www.bringingamericabackTolife.org, or you can also visit www.fromthemedian.org. The audio presentations of today and tomorrow will be on those websites. And then, thank you very much again for attending this wonderful conference. Please come back tomorrow too. If we're not already sold out, we may be, but if you can, please come back.
This is awesome. I don't know if this Matt was.